I'm Elliot Peters, and this is What Was That About?, a show that tries to get to the point of every movie. This week we're talking about a 90s family comedy and the first ever feature-length computer-animated movie. It's Toy Story. You can expect a quick plot refresher, a couple deep dives, a tangent or two, and at the end we'll decide once and for all, what was that about? All that and more after this quick intro. Welcome back, everybody. Toy Story 5 releases this week in theaters. And I, like many others, have my reservations about the continuation of the Toy Story franchise. While I regard the first three as modern masterpieces of family animation, the fourth installment left me a little cold. And while I don't necessarily think it's a bad film, it certainly felt like a bit of an unnecessary one. However, the premise of the upcoming fifth movie seems promising, so I'm not going to write off the possibility of a return to form. And that form is masterful. The original, of course, which we'll be talking about today, is astounding. When it first hit theaters in 1995, Toy Story redefined animation at a time when animated films were experiencing a bit of a cultural renaissance. After decades of experimentation and development, computer graphics were finally at a standard where they could shoulder entire narratives. Truly impressive, considering that the dinosaurs of Jurassic Park had debuted only 2 years previous. And then, of course, technical innovations aside, it's smart, it's funny. And while its visuals are dated by today's standards, it's remarkable how well the story and the characters hold up after 30 years. The artists and storytellers at Pixar really set a blueprint here, off of which they would eventually launch one of the most trusted studio names in the film industry. Toy Story was released in 1995. It was directed by John Lasseter, with a screenplay by Joss Whedon, Andrew Stanton, Joel Cohen, and Alex Sokolow. It stars Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, Annie Potts, John Ratzenberger, and Don Rickles. It was edited by Robert Gordon and Lee Unkrich, with music by Randy Newman. But what was it about? On paper, a cowboy doll named Sheriff Woody enjoys a charmed life as the favorite toy of a young boy named Andy. But on Andy's 6th birthday, a brand new action figure, Buzz Lightyear, changes the hierarchy overnight. Overcome with jealousy, Woody attempts to remove Buzz from the equation, but his reckless scuffle rewards them both with a stint at the misbehaving next-door neighbor's house, Sid, a delinquent kid with a penchant for toy mutilation. Woody and Buzz must overcome their differences in order to survive Sid's backyard and make it back to Andy's house before he moves away forever. Beneath the surface, all 4, and possibly 5, of the Toy Story films are really psychological narratives, which deal with the maturity of identity and the ways in which our identities change as we progress through adulthood. The other films I'll leave on the table for potential future episodes, but 1995's Toy Story asks a lot of questions about who we are, what forces make us that way, and whether or not we have any say in the matter at all. Before we dive too far into these themes, let's set the scene. In 1995, American animated films were enjoying a much-deserved stint in the limelight after decades of box office duds. The one true heavy hitter in the industry was Walt Disney Animation Studios, whose roster of films had defined the medium for a generation of moviegoers, with classics like Pinocchio, Bambi, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But following Walt Disney's death in December of 1966, the studio struggled to maintain the same kind of cultural power that it had previously enjoyed. Films like The Aristocats, The Rescuers, The Black Cauldron, and The Fox and the Hound failed to garner the same universal critical acclaim of their predecessors, and the box office was beginning to reflect it. But all that changed in 1989 with the release of The Little Mermaid. Suddenly, Disney was back on top, and their next 3 films were a truly generational run of defining classics. From 1991 to 1995, Disney Animation Studios released Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, back to back to back, raking in dollars, acclaim, and Academy Awards. If you want to go more in depth into this period of Walt Disney Animation Studios' history, I would highly recommend checking out the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty, which you can find on Disney Plus right now. So the stage was set for animated films to perform. But what nobody anticipated was for the entire medium to be so thoroughly redefined just 1 year later. You see, in the 1970s, Pixar was conceived as a part of the Lucasfilm computer division, working almost exclusively in the realm of special effects, under Industrial Light and Magic, for projects like Star Trek and Young Sherlock Holmes. The 80s were a rocky period, during which Pixar was divorced from Lucasfilm and kept afloat by affluent investors and colleagues of Lucas, including a hefty bid from Steve Jobs. These days, Pixar and Disney are synonymous, with many people referring erroneously to Pixar films as Disney animation films, a lack of distinction that on the whole matters very little, since Pixar was acquired by Disney in 2006. But at the time of Toy Story's release in 1995, Pixar was a completely separate entity, a true Hollywood underdog, built from the scraps of George Lucas's special effects budget, and with production costs only partially produced and financed by the Walt Disney Company, which had not yet purchased the studio. With a body of work consisting entirely of short films which topped out at a maximum of 5 minutes in runtime, Toy Story was a massive undertaking for this little studio. And with such limited implementation of the technology known to the public at this time, it was completely unheard of for an entire film to be created within the confines of a computer. But let's talk about those confines, because I think this is one of the things that makes Pixar animation such a special medium for storytelling. I mentioned this briefly in my episode on Ratatouille, but the pre-production process in animation has always been an intensely iterative process, by necessity, really, because once a shot goes to the artist, whose time and talents you're paying for by the hour, you want to make absolutely sure that the shot is going to end up in the finished movie. What a disaster it would be for a shot to be animated by hand for days straight, sent to in-betweens, inked, photographed, and then and only then thrown in the bin in the cutting room. What a waste, right? You take that kind of workflow and apply it to computer animation in the 1990s, and suddenly the costs increase tenfold. Now, not only are you paying for an artist's time and talent, you're paying for computer power, render time, digital storage. The hardware to build the state-of-the-art RenderMan engine at Pixar certainly cost a lot more than pencils and paper. So, of course, the story had to be perfect, especially in those early days. Longtime Pixar head Ed Catmull's book, Creativity, Inc., goes into incredible detail on this story process, which includes script drafts, story reels made with rough sketches, temp music, and dialogue, screenings of those reels to the writing team, and then an intensive meeting with the Pixar Brain Trust, during which those writers pull apart the reels, put them back together, and send the idea back into the factory to start the whole cycle again with another script draft. This process gets repeated at least a half a dozen times on every Pixar project, and it's the reason why the run of films from the 90s to the 2010s was so universally beloved. The breakthrough technology was the vehicle, but the story, that was king. So let's talk story. I would argue that at its core, Toy Story tackles the type of narrative that you would see in a sort of religious deconstruction. Hear me out on this. Woody and Buzz are both delusional. Completely and totally delusional, living in fabricated, made-up fantasy worlds. It's easy to watch the film and identify Buzz's delusions. The characters do it for you. He believes he is really a space ranger, sent to an alien planet to defeat Emperor Zurg, a sentiment that is treated as ridiculous by every other character. But Woody's delusion is more difficult to spot, primarily because at first the narrative actually seems to agree with him. And I would argue that Woody's delusion, his discovery of it, and his deconstruction of it, is what the meat of the story of Toy Story is really about. You see, Woody thinks that he is owed a very particular status in the hierarchy of Andy's room. He enjoys the spotlight as the favorite toy, which apparently also grants him the enormous sociological benefits of being the de facto leader in all situations. The toys look up to him to provide agendas. Woody's wants are the group's wants, not because he looks out for them, but because he gets them to look out for him. He's a deeply selfish character at the start of this movie. All of this changes when Buzz arrives. The very existence of a Buzz Lightyear challenges Woody's faith, because he seems to ascribe to a completely different viewpoint on the nature of the universe, a viewpoint that Woody tries and fails to disprove through philosophical debate and reasoning. As you see in the movie, Woody suffers a very reactionary change upon meeting Buzz. Even before Andy's behavior really starts to change towards him, the very first insult to Woody's pride and his status is enough for Woody to react with petty insults and bullying. Meanwhile, Buzz believes that he has special abilities. He is destined for a great purpose, his intergalactic mission, and that there are threats to his ideology hiding in plain sight all around him. Woody's targeting of Buzz in the opening sequences of the movie can easily be read as a sort of witch hunt. He baselessly champions for Buzz's removal from the top spot in the room, for all sorts of reasons other than his true motivation, which is his insecurity. Woody slowly becomes paranoid and insecure, not merely because Buzz now has the attention that Woody previously enjoyed, but because Buzz stands in opposition to Woody's entire belief system. Simply put, Andy is like a godlike figure in Woody's life, and he believes himself to serve Andy's higher purposes. Woody is a leader of the toys in the same manner of a pastor, holding meetings like a mass in order to navigate a world which he sees as governed entirely by his creator. He puts no stock in the fact that children make choices based on impulse and the occasional arbitrary decision. Andy's actions carry a meaning larger than that to Woody, and have bearing on the philosophical underpinnings of Woody's entire life. This brings me to the idea of the locus of control. Now that sounds very heady, but it's pretty simple in practice. I'm going to read an excerpt from a paper entitled Locus of Control, Self-Control and Health Outcomes by Ferdy Botha and Sarah C. Dahmen. Quote, locus of control describes the belief about the extent to which life events are due to own actions, characterizing people with internal locus of control, rather than outside forces beyond one's control, characterizing people with an external locus of control. There is ample evidence of a link between a greater internal locus of control and more favorable outcomes and behaviors across a range of domains, including savings and investments, job search strategies, and labor market outcomes, as well as physical health, health behaviors, and psychological well-being. Simply put, to have an internal locus of control is to believe that the outcomes of your life are almost entirely due to your own actions. Whereas having an external locus of control is to believe that the outcomes of your life are due to external forces. Locuses are like the kind of worldviews that we start to build as children, rudimentally, sort of like if-then statements that we build up over time. And so to have an internal locus of control is to believe that the outcomes of your life are due to your own actions. To have an external locus of control is to believe that the outcomes of your life are due to external actions and like external factors. Say I am a student, an elementary school student, and I'm going to school and I keep getting bad grades. If I have an internal locus of control, then I almost entirely believe that the bad grades are due to my own actions. And if I have an external locus of control, I believe that the bad grades are due to things that are beyond my control, things that I have no control over. Everyone has some varying degrees of the two sort of locuses. Some people weigh things more heavily internally versus externally. But what this paper argues, and what a lot of people kind of tend to assume scientifically, is that if you have a larger internal locus of control, then you're more self-motivated, and you therefore can lead a more psychologically healthy life. And this factors directly into the conversation that I'm trying to have about religion, because religion can play a very large part in the external or internal locus of control that an individual believes that they have over their life. If, for example, you believe that there is a higher power, then of course there are things beyond your control. This is the underlying logic behind claims of God's plan, whereas a more atheistic person or an agnostic person who doesn't necessarily believe in the existence of a higher power may instead believe that they have complete and total control over the outcomes of their life because, well, there's no external forces that are trying to guide me in any one particular direction. That's kind of a very specific application of this. Obviously, there are things that are outside of my control as an individual that do affect me. I'm not saying that everything that happens to me is due to my actions. This is how I sort of see it factoring into this religious reading of Toy Story. In this way, Woody can be said to have an almost entirely external locus of control. Woody's entire identity is wrapped up in the idea that external forces, Andy, gives him purpose. If Andy deems Woody worthless, then he is worthless, right? This sort of idea is also partially based off of readings that you could get from the sequels, the subsequent movies. I think that this almost more heavily factors into Woody's character arc in the second film, but it certainly exists here. Meanwhile, Buzz is intensely internally driven. He believes that he is the maker of his own destiny. But both of them are delusional, right? Buzz is more comically apparent at first glance, but I would argue that Woody's delusion is actually the more sinister one, and that's why it's the one that really drives the forces of the story. Simply the divergence of belief between these two characters is enough to give us this reading. But the movie takes it even further, as these two are thrown into the mix together. I'll give you more examples. Their rivalry ultimately puts Woody and Buzz outside of their comfort zone, out in the world as individuals who can only rely on themselves to survive. This could be seen as them leaving the church, after their belief systems are directly challenged by one another's existence. By leaving their place of worship or their pre-existing social circle, they begin to encounter even more belief systems showing the true diversity of the world around them. The aliens of the claw machine, for instance, are a distinctly funny and honestly kind of disturbing example. Trapped in a plastic prison for their entire existence, the aliens' only source of social stimulus beyond each other is the claw, which they regard as a deity, choosing who stays and who goes. The nature of this choice, we know as audience members, is random. The aliens are all identical, and there's no reason why a child would choose one over the other. It is truly luck of the draw, whatever the claw machine allows the kid to pick up. But the aliens, seeing as how this claw machine constitutes their entire world, have ascribed a deep and religious meaning to the claw's actions, much like Woody has ascribed a deeply religious meaning to any of Andy's actions. One of the aliens says to his brethren as he's being lifted skyward, "I have been chosen. Farewell, my friends, I go on to a better place." It's almost as if he has been selected by Christ to ascend to the kingdom of heaven. Woody is privy to this dramatic irony just like we are as the audience. Woody knows that the claw is just a game for children, so by exposing him to this third belief system, his own beliefs are even further fractured. This, of course, all comes to a head with the arrival at Sid's house, where most of the story's main action takes place. It's here that Woody encounters the satanic figure who seems in direct opposition to Woody's own god, Andy. Much like religious extremists might label their detractors as followers of Satan, Woody believes that the mutant toys, cobbled together by Sid, are evil and corrupt. It's not until he allows himself to completely abandon his narcissistic worldview that he comes to view them as equals and even as friends and allies. Of course, the most overt depiction of complete and total ideological deconstruction is Buzz's crisis of faith, which happens much faster than Woody's and is much more traumatically triggered. Buzz's attempt to fly to freedom and his subsequent fall and injury lead him to a deep depression, during which he loses all sense of self and all sense of meaning. The scene where he is roused back to action is a particularly powerful and important one, and one which I'd like to read for the sake of further discussion. Thunder rumbles as rain pours down outside the spooky dwelling. Sid is in bed, fast asleep. Woody struggles to move his milk crate jail, but with the weight of the toolbox on top, it won't budge. Woody looks across the desktop at Buzz, who's sitting dejectedly with a rocket strapped to his back. Woody says, "Psst, psst. Hey, Buzz." Woody picks up a stray washer from the desktop and flings it at Buzz, striking his helmet. "Hey, get over here and see if you can get this toolbox off me." Buzz lifts his head and turns lifelessly to look at Woody. Woody says, "Oh, come on, Buzz. Buzz, I can't do this without you. I need your help." Buzz says, "I can't help. I can't help anyone." Woody says, "Why, sure you can, Buzz. You can get us out of here, and then I'll get that rocket off you, and we'll make a break for Andy's house." Buzz says, "Andy's house, Sid's house. What's the difference? Woody says, "Oh, Buzz, you've had a big fall. You must not be thinking clearly." Buzz says, "No, Woody, for the first time I am thinking clearly. You were right all along. I'm not a space ranger. I'm just a toy. A stupid little insignificant toy." Woody says, "Whoa, hey. Being a toy is a lot better than being a space ranger." Buzz says, "Yeah, right." Woody says, "No, it is. Look, over in that house is a kid who thinks you're the greatest. And it's not because you're a space ranger, pal. It's because you're a toy. You're his toy." Buzz says, "But why would Andy want me?" Woody says, "Why would Andy want you? Look at you. You're a Buzz Lightyear. Any other toy would give up his moving parts just to be you. You've got wings, you glow in the dark, you talk, your helmet does that whoosh thing. You are a cool toy. As a matter of fact, you're too cool. I mean, what chance does a toy like me have against a Buzz Lightyear action figure? All I can do is..." He pulls his pull string, and his voice box says, "There's a snake in my boot." Woody says, "Why would Andy ever want to play with me when he's got you? I'm the one that should be strapped to that rocket." He slumps dejectedly against the crate, turning his back to Buzz. Buzz is thinking about what Woody has just said, his eyes shifting around. He raises an eyebrow and lifts his foot to look at Andy's name written on it, still visible through the scuff marks in the dirt. He looks at Woody with determination in his eyes. Woody says, "Listen, Buzz, forget about me. You should get out of here while you can." There's silence. Woody turns to see that Buzz is gone. Woody sadly sighs in defeat and bows his head, accepting his fate. Suddenly there's a clattering noise up above. He looks up to see Buzz is on top of the milk crate, trying to push the toolbox off. "Buzz, what are you doing?" "I thought you were..." Buzz says, "Come on, Sheriff. There's a kid over in that house who needs us. Now let's get you out of this thing." And Woody says, "Yes, sir." In this scene, Buzz points out the futility, the utter and complete futility of their existence. Andy's house, Sid's house, what's the difference? Woody has now reckoned with the fact that, for better or for worse, he no longer holds the same position in Andy's esteem. Ultimately, it is Buzz's reappraisal of Woody's belief system that allows him to regain his agency. They've seen enough of the world to know the limitations of their own ideologies, and all they can hope to do is choose the pathway that they believe follows the most moral teachings. So it no longer matters who's the favorite toy, or who's right and who's wrong. It's about the ethics of the situation at the end of the day, and their internal agency over the ability to choose the path that best aligns with their individual morality. Woody starts the story thinking that there's nothing better than Andy being there for him, but instead he learns to find purpose in him being there for Andy. So if you ask me, what is Toy Story about? I would say deconstruction. Deconstruction of religion, deconstruction of identity, of narcissism, of the self, the limitations of religious belief, and the importance of an internal locus of control. Thanks for being here. Feel free to rate the show wherever you're listening, and if you think you know somebody who might like the show, share it around. You can watch video versions of the podcast, as well as find clips from the film I've talked about today on my social media and YouTube pages. Just visit whatwastthataboutpodcast.com. From there, you can follow me wherever you like. Instagram, Letterboxd, you name it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.